I tried to bleach my hair.
Did we get that one with the word "and"?
We're not like a complex.
Okay. I'll look. We'll look over the whole thing just to make sure we're good with it. Bless you. All right, now we're in business. All right, so at the top of page 3, in case you need to finish any of it off, where it says the word "and," for example, this would be filling in those areas. So the word "and," for example, only adds one independent clause to another without indicating how the two parts are related. Complex sentences are going to help with that. As this last one says, clear and more specific relations can be established through the use of complex sentences, which is where we're going to be going next. So this would be where we left off. All right? Okay. So, complex sentence. It's made up of what's called an independent clause, which we referred to as yesterday would be an example of a simple sentence, and one or more dependent clauses connected to it. So, for something to be a dependent clause, it's going to have a subject, it's going to have a verb, but it's not a complete thought. Something's missing. I'm going to try not to use Logan as any examples today. I'll probably fail, at which point you can call me out on it. All right, so complex sentence made up of independent clause and a dependent clause. We'll certainly show you some examples of those. A dependent clause, it's similar to the independent, but it just doesn't have one of those elements that would make it a complete sentence. Really, that element is going to be it's not a complete thought. There's English language we know is very confusing. There's things called phrases. There's things called clauses. If it's a phrase, it doesn't have a subject or a verb. But for us, a clause just isn't going to be a complete action. Some examples now of dependent clauses. And they are going to have these, and I'll raise it up here so you can see the three better if you're sitting in the back. They have what's called subordinating conjunctions with them. So we're taking that simple sentence we had before. Mary and Samantha arrived at the bus station before noon. Or he or Joe waited at the train station. They left on the bus. If you had simply those words, you would have a complete sentence. But you have these conjunctions here. Because Mary and Samantha arrived at the bus station before noon, or while he waited at the train station, after they left on the bus, it still requires another part for it to be a complete sentence. Here is the confusing thing that I can't explain because it's just an English language thing. So there's no good reason for it. All right, I'm going to acknowledge that at the beginning. What's a compound sentence from yesterday? That are joined and by a conjunction and a comma. What were those conjunctions from yesterday? Very good. Or, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. So you're taking two sentences and you're putting them together and you're adding a word. You could argue that I ate lunch while he waited at the train station would be a complete sentence. I ate lunch while he waited at the train station. Well, he waited at the train station. I ate lunch. Those are two independent clauses. I'm just joining them together with the word while. Isn't that the same thing? No. Why not, Mr. Kane? Because it's not, and I don't have a good answer for you. If you were to write, Mary and Samantha arrived at the bus station before noon, it's an independent clause. It could be a complete sentence. You add the word because, now it just becomes a dependent clause. It's not the same thing as using fanboys. It's a totally different entity. It's a totally different word. It's just one of those rules that kind of came along the line. So if you were to write something, you're working on your essay, while Oedipus waited for Creon to return, period, incomplete sentence. You'd have to add something to it. Well, what was happening while he was waiting for Creon to return? After Tiresias left Oedipus, you can't go period. You would still need something to come after it. So if you use any of these words, because, while, after, and there are some others, it's going to require you to have at least a complex sentence, or it's going to be a little bit lengthier. It's just one of those things that it's the way it is within the English language. Dependent clauses, such as the ones that we just wrote, can't stand alone as a complete sentence. You can have sentences that begin with because and begin with after. They just have to have more content to them. They can be added to an independent clause to form what's called a complex sentence. And that's the type of sentences that generally tend to be the most descriptive, the most detailed, the most sophisticated. Doesn't mean you want every sentence to be a complex sentence, but when you're trying to explain something, you're trying to highlight relationships, that's usually the best way to go. While, because, after, before, those are things that add cause and effect, illustrate relationships between two events. If it's a dependent clause, it's going to begin with what's called a subordinating conjunction, and I'm going to give you a list of them coming up here, which you're going to be filling out at the bottom of your sheet. I'll give you another paper copy of the subordinating conjunctions here in a little bit as we start getting into some essay writing, so that you can also take a look at some other ones that might be useful for you. But these would be examples. They're not all of them, but they're probably the ones that are most commonly used. So after, although, because, before, even though, if, since, though, unless, until, when, whenever, whereas, wherever, while, those are all subordinating conjunctions. While Emily took her notes, period, is an incomplete sentence. We need to know what happened. Whereas Brendan was absent, incomplete sentence. We need to know what else is going on. If you use those words, it's going to be a lengthier, most likely more complex sentence. Logan, you could go, until Mr. Kane leaves me alone. You can't go period, because it's not a complete sentence. You have to add something to it. Until Mr. Kane leaves me alone, I'm going to... Okay, until Mr. Kane leaves me alone, I have to deal with him. Complex sentence, complete thought, you're good to go at that point. Until Logan and Alex's table stop having hopping sounds in the cafeteria, I might have to left. Bring down my nutty bar, sit down, be good time. Since Jack wore his hat the first week of school in the cafeteria, he had to be called out, but he's completely ignoring us. Since Jack did the wrong homework assignment for Thursday, he will do the correct one for Friday, which is tomorrow. Oh, did everyone get them? I didn't mean to zoom in. Okay. So, turning the page. Complex sentence joins an independent clause with one or more dependent clauses. The dependent clause can go first in the sentence, followed by the independent clause, such as going to be these examples here, or it can be in reverse, and we'll give you some more examples of that. So these would be examples of complex sentences where the first part is the dependent clause. How do you know you're looking at a dependent clause? You see the word because, you see the word while, you see the word after. That gives you a pretty good guess that you could be looking at a dependent clause. Because Mary and Samantha arrived at the bus station before noon, I did not see them at the station. While he waited at the train station, Joe realized that the train was late. After they left on the bus, Mary and Samantha realized that Joe was waiting at the train station. I'm not going away, I'm just trying to make it more visible. What do we notice from a punctuation standpoint? Besides, you put a period at the end. You have a comma that separates the dependent and the independent clause. So you start off with a dependent clause, you're going to have a comma. After I get home from school today, comma, I will be sure to do my vocabulary. After I get out of school today, comma, I have to go to football practice. After I leave Mr. Kane's class today, comma, I will shed. Well, you won't because we get to spend lunch. While Mr. Kane spends lunch with me, comma, I will be annoyed. Don't feel the need to shake your head one way or another. So you have comma that is going to go in between the two. I don't know if this is case for you. I remember it was for me throughout elementary and middle school. Mean English teachers would say you cannot begin a sentence with the word because. You can most certainly begin a sentence with the word because. So if that's something that has been said to you, don't ever begin a sentence with because. You certainly can. What is a bad habit, and this might be why you were told not to, if indeed you were, don't begin all your sentences with the word because. Don't go, because of this, because of this, because of this, over and over again. Then it gets to be a little too repetitive. So if that's the reason, that might be a reason why you were told. But you can start a sentence with because grammatically you are still okay. Down at the bottom then is the little tip that gets mentioned. When the dependent clause comes first, a comma should be used to separate the two clauses. So you'd want to make sure you highlight that part as well. All right, confusing part. Conversely, independent clause can go first in a sentence. You don't have to start with the dependent clause. So you could start with an independent clause followed by a dependent clause, and you would have examples like this. You should start to notice something, though, so far as the punctuation. I did not see them at the station because Mary and Samantha arrived at the bus station before noon. In this case, no comma separating the independent and dependent clause. One of those funky rules that you have of English. You start off with a dependent clause, comma, independent clause. If you go independent clause followed by dependent clause, no comma necessary. Your mind has just exploded. Take it in. So, all of these sentences up here are still complex sentences. I did not see them at the station. That would be an independent clause. You could have a sentence, I did not see them at the station. Because Mary and Samantha arrived at the bus station before noon is a dependent clause. If I lead off with an independent clause, I don't need to have a comma in between the independent and the dependent. But if I took the same exact sentence and I flipped it, because Mary and Samantha arrived at the bus station before noon, as you just wrote, I have to put a comma after it. Follow-up question, why? Answer, it's the way it is. Said that sometimes, people think you can't start a sentence with because. I think there's also a situation where a lot of people think if I use the word because mid-sentence, I have to have a comma right there with it. That's not the case. So Joe realized that the train was late, independent clause. While he waited at the train station, dependent clause, two go together, no comma. Mary and Samantha realized that Joe was waiting at the train station, dependent clause. Oops. After they left on the bus, that would be the dependent clause. No comma in between the two. So then down here at the bottom, as we said, when the independent clause comes first, a comma should not be used to separate the two clauses. Right. Heavy door too. So complex sentences are often, I don't want to say all the time, but are often more effective than compound because you're indicating a clearer and more specific relationship. The words while, because, after, before, whereas tend to have a more specific relation than for, and, nor, but, or, yet. So complex sentences, I think, are a good way to go a lot of the time. A little bit more sophisticated. The word before, or after tells the reader one thing occurs at a different time than another. So, or, and doesn't necessarily do that. Maybe yet does to a certain degree. A word such as although conveys a more complex relationship than the word such as and would normally convey. So you get more options when you're going with a complex sentence. You can get the same ideas across, and it's usually not too difficult to change a compound to a complex sentence. But these words, it's deciding which one is going to be the more precise or the most precise word that you would want to have. Was just simply kind of talking about this here a little bit. When you deal with beginning with the word and or because, are you allowed to do that? We're on the last page here. Simple rule basically ends up should you begin the sentence with and or but, you really probably should not. The short answer is no. It's not necessarily grammatically incorrect, but it is kind of frowned upon. I would say of those words, so and but tend to be the most common ones that people will start to overuse. There could be a time that you might want to use one for emphasis. You might make a statement about something. You want to highlight an exception. You could go with the word but and then have your thought coming after it. If you're going to begin a sentence with a conjunction, it's important that you realize that you're doing it and you have a specific reason to do it. You should only really do it if it's the best way to emphasize a certain point. You don't want to get in the habit of going and this, and that, so on and so forth over and over again. So those fanboys, basically, you're pretty much going to stay away from. Because are words that you certainly would be able to use. Sentences like those mentioned could be done effectively. Just make sure you're careful with how you end up going about doing that. So it can be worthwhile, but it's something that probably won't do all that often. When it comes to because, as we mentioned, there is nothing wrong with beginning a sentence with because. I do think sometimes we're told that you should not do that over and over again, so we try to avoid it. But it certainly is fine to have that in your dependent clause so far as it's followed by an independent clause. If you're writing a whole bunch of dependent clauses, then Jack would have a problem. But if he has a sentence beginning with because, it's a dependent clause, it's followed by an independent clause, perfectly fine. Any questions? All right. This is not a quiz. It's not a graded assignment. It's not that surprise party quite yet. Notice how I did that quite yet thing again. Yeah, I can't have it. I would have put this word and said exactly on that. How many surprise parties have you had this year? None. Surprising. Logan, I wouldn't do like say next week, next Friday you have a quiz, you're gonna have a vocab quiz. I wouldn't unannounced move it up to Thursday or something like that. If we were going over something in class and it seemed like people weren't paying attention, they generally I tend to. See how it says practice up at the top?
Yeah.
Not that it's a legal binding agreement, but this one's practice. Try to do this, and I'm not going to worry about answering the whole thing at this point. What I want you to do is identify 7 coordinating conjunctions. I want you to do 8, 9, 10, and I want you to do 11 through 19, where you're identifying if it's simple, compound, or complex. At this point, I don't want you worried about what's on the back of the page. All right? Try to do it without looking at the notes. And if you already were looking at it, it's not that we're going to take those answers away. But see, can you come up with the fanboys off the top of your head? Can you come up with some coordinating conjunctions off the top of your head? Can you figure out if you think these are simple, compound, or complex sentences? There are some for the 11 through 19 that are tricky, and I purposely made them tricky. Again, it's not a quiz, but don't worry about that. I just want you to do what's up. What do we got?
Forward and north. What? So, forward. Yes. Yes. So.
I mentioned to you that the word, I thought of the fanboys, the word for would be the one that you use, that you'd be least likely to use. The word for can get used in place of because. So if you have a complex sentence that uses the word because, there's a good chance that you could use for. It might sound like in your inner head, in your inner ear, like, boy, that sounds a little awkward. I had to pack lunch today. You could go, I packed a lunch today because the school meal will not be enough for me. You could also write, I had to pack lunch today for the school meal won't be enough for me. They're basically interchangeable. It's just that for ends up being a compound sentence instead of a complex. Tyler, what's one of the 3 subordinating conjunctions that we could put down? We could put down more than 3, but what's one that you have? While? I'll bring it to you. Julia, what's one that you have? Although? Mia, what's another option we could go? Pardon? And certainly there are more that we could do after, because, or after, before, because, all that kind of stuff. Maddie, what'd you do for 11? Complex. Any argument?
Nope.
That's not the same sentence we have.
That's not the same sentence.
Oh, this might be a different one.
Yeah.
Well, that's unfortunate.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a different one. That's my, see? Look, you get a practice again one that can also pop up.
Alright, so the first number 11 on the next one is.
Oh, here, I'll
You don't know that?
I'm looking at my paper.
Well, what if that's not right?
Yeah.
Computer's taking forever. After school, Layla made a stop at Starbucks, or if you really like Starbucks, you might call it St. Arbucks. You're going,
Let's say Starbucks.
Let's save on this.
I'm gonna call it that now.
Starbucks.
Yeah, I'm gonna start calling
you
it
went complex. Josh, you said wait because it was a different one up there.
It's
Are you
not
okay with it
complex.
being complex, Tommy? Did you go complex just to get more options?
What?
For number 11, you got complex? Compound? Anything else?
It's complex.
It's simple.
I put that.
Oh, man.
It's simple.
Wait, put that in.
Yes, and this is a trick one, okay? This is a trick one.
Whoa.
And this is why, like, I wouldn't make this one as like a quiz or something for you right off the bat for it. And if you get it right, you get the bonus points, I guess, for it.
Yeah.
The follow-up question with this is going to be, okay, why is it going to be simple? Number 11 is simple. Number 13 is also simple. I know I skipped 12. Number 11 is simple. Number 13 is simple.
That makes no sense.
And that's okay. I'm perfectly okay with it not making sense because, again, these ones are meant to be tricky ones. And this here is taking forever to load up.
Oh, it's a spinning wheel.
Number 12.
Ending with a comma.
And I'll come back to 11 and 13. Number 12. The dog chased the rabbit after it caught a mole is not simple.
Dang.
Number 12 is not compound. Number 12 is complex. Here is why number 12 is complex. The dog chased the rabbit. That could be a complete sentence. That would be an independent clause. After it caught a mole is a dependent clause. After, like before, was one of those subordinating conjunctions. I think what makes number 12, what could make it tricky, is there's no comma. But because you led with an independent clause, and then it's followed by a dependent clause, you don't have to have a comma with it. You couldn't have a sentence after it caught a mole, because you would have to imply something. A dependent clause, and listen to this part, because this will help with 11 and 13. For it to be a dependent clause, it has to have three things. A subordinating conjunction. It has to have a subject, something that is doing an action, and it has to have a verb. So after it caught a mole has all three of those things. If I take a look at number 11, or I take a look at number 13, after school, comma, Layla made a stop at Starbucks. Layla made a stop at Starbucks, we know that's okay with the sentence. After school, I have a subordinating conjunction. I have a noun. What do I not have? I don't have a verb. I don't have any action. Because I don't have that, it's considered a phrase. It doesn't get the name of a clause. The same thing happens with 13. While watching TV, Jake unsuccessfully attempted to study for his world history test or his surprise party. I have while, subordinating conjunction. I have watching in action. I have TV, which is a noun, but I don't have it doing something. If you look at 14, 14 is a complex sentence. While his brother watched TV in the other room, Jake studied for his history test. You compare while watching TV while his brother watched TV in the other room. Number 14 has the conjunction, has the subject, has the verb, which number 13 or number 11 doesn't. no offense, Maddie, I wanted you to get it wrong, so that we could then kind of do that whole explanation with. So number 11, simple. Number 12, complex. Number 13, simple. Number 14, complex. Number 15, I can't go out tonight, comma, for I didn't get enough of my homework done during my 2 study hall todays. 4, with the comma, fanboys, I know that was compound. When I don't have to go to school, I enjoy watching movies and playing football. That one would be complex. When I don't have to go to school could not be an independent clause by itself. Stephanie and Marissa each spent $170 at 3 different stores in the mall. They have a lot of money, but it is a simple sentence. I just received my paycheck, yet I don't have enough money to go to the movies with my friends. Compound.
That's a terrible
Out.
paycheck.
I don't mind.
Because of yet, fanboys. So yeah. And then last one.
Like $10.
I became ill after I ate 3 dozen chicken wings in 24 minutes. There's no comma, but it is still a
How many dozen?
complex sentence after.
I would have
Because that's important.
Complex.
Yes.
That was pretty nice.
Depends on the type.
No, I have 40 points. Well, mild.
Hey, what do you know? That's working now.
Mild is yeah. Not really.